Hello and welcome back to another preview, this time of the IEM Cologne playoffs. We didn't do anything for the play-in or the group stage, mostly for scheduling reasons. I also forgot that it was starting so soon. In my mind, Cologne was in the far distant future. But no, August is here, we're in the midst of Cologne, and it's time to talk about the playoffs. Joining me, as he always does on this series of videos, is Yumi. Yeah, how you doing, man? How much have you been keeping up with this event?
Yeah, I've been kind of on and off. It's kind of an unfortunate timing where I say unfortunate. Family duties call. I was celebrating a birthday. Was kind of traveling for that, and so I've only been able to catch tidbits here and there.
Hmm.
I've watched a fair amount of the highlights, and I've been keeping track of the games. But when it comes to like the intricacies of why X, Y, Z happened in a specific game or what went wrong in the specific game, I might not have the most amount of details on. I've maybe seen and scratched the surface of some of the reasons I think that could be. So
That's all right. We're literally doing talking head content. We're here to entertain, really, more than
that is
anything.
true.
So that's all good. Just hit the generic storylines, call someone shit, have a good laugh, and move on. That's always been my approach to
And we
these
don't
sorts
shy
of
away
things.
from that, so we're fine.
No, we do like to call people shit. That is very true. We've never held back. Just a quick recap, actually, because we did have another preview event before this. We did Blast Groups. I did pretty well. I got 3 of my 4 picks correct. You did pretty terribly. Got 3 of your 4 picks incorrect. And the viewers, unfortunately, saw reason, picked the same thing as me, and got maximum points. So we're both losing. We're both on 15 points. The viewers are on 22. Give yourselves a pat on the back. You're clearly geniuses so far. You might cock it all up in the coming events. But yeah, we're behind and we're evenly terrible. So I think that's a positive and negative.
Yeah, that's bad because that's where I had a lead going into
You
our
did.
little bout. So yeah, no,
You're
that's
up
that's not
too.
that's not good for me.
I mean, if you look at the progression of the points, you've really choked this season away. That's over the last 2 events. I'm winning
It's for
6-1.
content. I obviously haven't been thinking with the analytical side of my brain. I've just been thinking about the content.
Okay, fair enough. Just
Also,
content
blast
talks.
groups
All
don't
right.
really count. It's like a boot camp for teams, basically. So
Oh yeah, I mean, the world's like flashiest boot camp. It's
yeah.
very silly in that sense. And when you watch the teams play, you realize how true it somewhat is. Like, oh, they're just trying stupid stuff out here. This is not a real match. But thankfully, no one takes that approach to Cologne. So Cologne, we've had some real games. What is it? It's like the 4 of the top 6 seeds, is it, that are through to the playoffs? It's incredible. Only FaZe is missing out of the top 5. I don't count Gamer Legion as really a number 6 seed in the world, if you look at the HLTV rankings.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to go down to number 10 to see Cloud9. I think it's a pretty solid field. This is going to be a banger set of playoffs.
Yeah, no, I think so as well. Especially because I think we have mostly the teams that haven't made like grandiose or crazy changes. I guess bar Cloud9 in there, which is
Yeah.
I think people expected that to be a pretty lock-in team if they came in
Mm.
with their whole lineup, which they didn't even
No,
for
they
this
didn't even
event.
need to,
Super.
apparently.
Yeah.
Even, everyone's thinking, yeah, they might have a bit of rust, new IGL, but they got so much firepower. They didn't even have the firepower, and they still made it through. To be fair, the wins they got, they lost to Fnatic, beat Cloud, they beat Nine, Monty, and Gamer Legion. So they did have to go through like a home sweet home kind of bracket to make it
But
through
so
to
did
the
Vitality for
playoffs.
the major. So
And so, yeah, there's always a punchline at the end of that. So they did deserve it. It's just, yeah, maybe we haven't seen them tested as much as we would have liked, and we'll see how it fits with Axel. But on that note, we'll start with the quarterfinal games. We made our picks essentially. We just did 2 winners of who we think is potentially going to win this event. It's kind of awkward to just do a pure playoffs prediction. You can't really pick dark horses in this sense. So we're going to start with our quarterfinalist winners. I went first and picked Vitality to come through that quarterfinal and potentially go on and win the event. Yeah, they've looked pretty solid so far at this event. You can argue FlameZ hasn't looked spectacular, even though his numbers are. But when you think about it, that's the ideal scenario. He's slotted right in, the system still looks solid, the roles seem to be fairly comfortable. Even if Spinks isn't showing his best, FlameZ's fragging, Zywoo's carrying. Vitality look very secure. I think there was one absolutely ridiculous statistical anomaly of a series where 4 players ended with like a 1.3 rating, and then Apex was just bottom frag, like basically AFK dying repeatedly, and it didn't matter. They still won that series. So this team looks really comfortable. They flowed right into this after the major, after Blast Groups, and I think they're still looking good. Even all the hype we had for them coming through the Blast Group ban, scrimmage, whatever you want to call it,
mhm.
they they've carried that momentum on. And I think they really do look dangerous. Yeah, one of my two favorite teams to actually make it through this event, even though I didn't get to pick just two
Yeah.
teams, they are top two for me. Like, there's no doubt about it. They are one of the scariest teams at this event.
Yeah, and for anyone unfamiliar with the format, we pick and we choose different teams from each other. That way, we don't have like this points conflict where we're almost, if theoretically, if I was in a lead, I could just pick the same teams as you, and I could just
It'd be
gamify the
really
system.
cheesy, yeah.
It would just be boring. But I do back the Vitality pick. I think coming into Cologne, I was really expecting them to work. Just simply because I think we talked about it previously when we were sort of going over roster moves and Flames even coming into this team. It just makes sense for his roles and what Vitality needed. It was something that
No.
Dupree could never fulfill on this team. They swapped a bunch of roles to try and fulfill or try and get Dupree into a comfortable position. They had Magisk entry fragging, then they had Dupree entry fragging, then they had Apex back to entry fragging. And they've landed on a nice aggressive rifler that is able to communicate internationally and has done so for the longest time on his previous team. So there wasn't going to be a massive bed-in period. That said, Spinks did take a little bit of time before he came online, but they've undergone that culture shift. The having to bed someone in from a different culture is also part of the battle that happens behind
Yeah.
the scenes. But Flamesy comes from the same part of the world, and both him and Spinks are friends as well, which also massively benefits this team in terms
It's a
of
big leg
chemistry
up,
and
yeah.
just being able to communicate and bring each other up to speed effectively. So I don't think there was going to be much question about whether Vitality did well. The roles feel like they make sense, and I'm just glad that it's actually kind of worked for this team because they've had other transitionary periods where it hasn't.
Yeah, this has been the smoothest of their transitions. And yeah, they lost their group decider to G2, but I've always found those a bit silly, the group deciders for seeding. Whilst it is important, it does skip an entire step, essentially winning that game in the playoffs. It still does feel less impactful. It's not life and death. Many teams are going to, I think, not quite perform to their highest level. So I'm not too worried about that little loss, that little blip on the path through. I'm really confident in this team. I think they've got a massive advantage over Cloud9, who are trying to bring in. They bring in two new players. They've played 4 games without Axar. Now they're bringing Axar back in, and they still haven't quite figured out their system. I think some of the defaults, the way they were playing, still look like they had Daphne gelling at times. It's just they were better players now. Like, that's essentially what it felt like. So it's not really a team I'm too threatened by, even if down the road we all agree, everyone knows, this is going to be a massively threatening roster. I don't think this is the event. Even with Axar coming in, even with the bombastic fraggers they have, I think Vitality have got this. So, the other quarterfinal, I believe you took a winner out of there. Who have you selected?
Oh, we're just gonna skip over the whole Cloud9 talk. Okay, that's fine.
If you want to jump in on Cloud9, go for it. But I didn't think there was too much to say.
I just wanted to talk about them briefly because they did say that they had practiced with Axel for like 3 weeks, and they didn't practice with Buster at all leading into this event because they had the expectation that they were going to play with Axel. I think a positive for Cloud9 going into that series is that, one, Axel's coming back, which is great news for the squad.
Sure, yeah.
But the only iffy thing will be whether or not Axel is kind of ready to play, because the rest of the team have been able to play their games effectively before this. But the good news for this team is that I think Hobbit said in a post-game interview, I think it was their final series against Gamer Legion where they almost lost, by the way.
Yeah, that was too close. Way too close.
Really, really, really close. And Gamer Legion played great. But one of the good things is that Hobbit said in the interview something along the lines of, in this new system, we can't just do the things that we like to do in the previous team, which does lead me into the idea that at least Electronic and Perfecto are trying to put their foot down on, we need to make this new thing work. And we are going to do everything we need to make it work. You either roll with the system or you don't. And it feels like most of them are trying to integrate it, because otherwise, why would you bring them in? So that's a positive. I just want to talk with Cloud9 because I like this team, and I can only hope they do well.
I got a feeling we're going to talk about them a lot until CS2 rolls around. And even then, if we're still talking CS at that point, we'll still be talking Cloud9. I think this roster is going to be one of the 3 or 4 best teams in the world in no time.
Yeah.
And arguably, they've got the potential to be the best. So, yeah, we're going to talk about them loads in the coming videos. But yeah, nice to touch on them now. But yeah, back to that other quarterfinal. Heroic Astralis. Oh, it's really tough. Who have you picked out of this one?
Yeah, I mean, people should probably know my feelings on Astralis, so I've picked Heroic. I like these guys coming in just because they didn't make any changes and they were still a very competitive team throughout the many different months, even if they had a bit of a dip towards the tail end of last year. I think it's weird at the moment because they haven't had the toughest road to get into this position to the quarterfinals. They lost to ENCE in their upper finals game in their group. which is why they land themselves in this position. But then they had Mongols and Monty. If we're going to sort of discredit or add the asterisks for Vitality, it's kind of the same story for Heroic here in this quarterfinal. And I think one of the reasons that they find themselves in this spot is that as much as I think this team gels and works well, a lot of it is contingent on whether or not Yabi works in this team. And throughout their better periods, when they are competing for the sort of top 4 positions in a tournament, then Yabi is there fighting with the rest of the squad, and he's been quiet this event. So that's my only concern coming into this as for a heroic picker. But that said, I think Astralis are in a much poorer position, and I can only hope as well that Yabi sort of warms up as we get further and further into the tournament. Now that we're in a stage environment, now that the yelling won't be scrutinized as much because there will be a crowd. This is the type of thing I feel like Heroic do. I've been doing a better job of because previously we used to see them in stage events and think that people sort of shelled up or didn't do the things that they were doing in group stage games. They just weren't used to that pressure. They've graduated that. They need to be able to perform on these stages, and I actually think they'll do well at this stage of the tournament.
I think it's very astute. The observation about Yabi, his impact is the way he allows them to play often is underrated by the stats. Like, cause you'll see him put up really nice numbers. Yeah, oh, you're a rifle, that's really good, but it's not crazy bombastic. Oh, this guy's completely shaping the game, but he kind of does in the way he lurks, the way he applies pressure, the fights he takes. So it does have more impact than the numbers might suggest. So I think that's important that Yabi does show up for them. I got a bad feeling about this game though, because I would have picked Heroic on many other occasions, but I didn't really like what I saw in the groups. And I think Astralis have 2 bona fide superstars in this series, whereas Heroic, if Yabi's not going to be, like, if Yabi needs to warm up, you guys can lose this series 2-0 to BlameF and Device, is how I feel about this game. Sure, BlameF's style, it does feel like they've kind of gone back to the complexity days of BlameF is calling, trying to set everyone up, but at the same time, he is just going to carry the boats at the end of the day. He's just going to be like, yes, I'll go do everything. And he's capable of it, and that's the terrifying thing if you're his opponent. If he can just get a little bit of impact out of his sort of supportive players in his mind, I think at this point he has 3 supports, himself and Device. If he can get a little bit out of them, he knows he's going to get some great stuff out of Device. Device has looked so good on this roster. He can potentially carry a map almost solo. I'm terrified for Heroic, because as much as they've looked better on stages of late, they still don't look good on stages. I still think they have some bottling problems, and that can really manifest, especially against a team who have slightly, I mean, BlameF's not too experienced in the same way, but players who seem far more consistent and solid on the big stages and unbothered by pressure. I think that's really where that sort of hesitation manifests. So that's the reason why I wouldn't have picked them if, say, my first pick, I didn't go with Heroic. That was sort of playing on my mind that maybe this is a losable series.
But you don't think the inexperience gap for players like Stare, Borup, Buzz is going to be
it doesn't bother me as much, because I'm not asking them to be a superstar. I'm asking them to just throw a flashbang, die, so BlameF can trade you. I'm not expecting the same levels of things. I need Yabi to have impetus and find impact. I need Stown to not lose like opening fights for free on T sides. I need him to have massive holds. These sort of things you're asking a lot more of a player to go and do that, rather than these players who are fixed in the system, doing little things, odd jobs, not having to carry maps. I think it's a lot easier for a young player to do.
Yeah, I mean, I like both Buzz, Stare, as players on this Astralis roster. It's still kind of questionable to me what the role of Borup is in this squad,
not
in terms of
entirely sure either.
And just in terms of like longevity, really is my concern, because like he's actually done okay, betting into this squad and I guess the BlameF system, because it's weird because I think BlameF's actually been taking more opening fights on this team. I don't know if he feels like he needs to take that kind of ownership on this squad, or maybe it's just a kind of a protective older brother to the younger guys, because that's surely why you have players like Stare and Buzz on this team. Like surely that's the role they're supposed to fulfill at some point.
Yeah, if you're like on paper saying replace BlameF with Glaive, for example, you're saying Stare, Buzz, these are the guys who are poking extremities, taking opening fights, leading the way into duels. But when you have BlameF as the IGL, it does really feel like when he's the IGL, he is going to be the guy to set himself up for the openers, to take that responsibility from you. And then you have to do your little bits and pieces, but he
Mhm.
does seem to take that mantle upon himself.
Yeah, it's just strange because even when Glaive was still on this team, BlameF was sharing some in-game leadership responsibilities from certain maps. I think Mirage was the most notable one when they started adding that one into their pool.
Mm,
But we didn't really see this type of play from Blame even in that system. So maybe it's just it might just feel like he needs that extra responsibility to make this particular five work. But yeah, I just think that Astralis still need another one or two roster moves. Even I'm not saying that Buzz's position is totally solidified on this team either.
mm.
But I just feel like they still need a couple more roster moves or some kind of I need somebody that I can trust to run the tactics on this team from like a flowchart point of view because it does feel very influx and very dependent on both Blame and Device to succeed in order for this team to get any wins. So that's just
Yeah.
where my gripe is.
Okay, yeah, fair enough. Like, I'm not gonna come into this series and say they're favourites. For me, it's more of it's a bogey pick that I
Hmm.
wouldn't want to go with Heroic in this scenario. But it's also because of who I picked in the semis, who I think Heroic are then gonna have to go and play, and I don't see them winning. Not on current form, not with the way the superstars have been showing out. G2 have looked, well, they look back like they're ready to go and win another event. And it feels hard to say that because they are so individually dependent. They need Nico to be great. They need m0NESY to not be whiffing shots like he was during that opening map, where everyone kind of got terrified for them. m0NESY's had 2 maps, I think, this event where he looked terrible, then a bunch of others where he's just been absolutely incredible. And overall, at this event specifically, Nico's not even been their best rifler for every series. Hunter's had amazing series. JKS has looked really solid at times. Hooksy still looks like he's playing with the wrong mouse, like he's using like a little scroll wheel to just aim his crosshair. He looks awful at this event, but overall the team's winning. The fraggers are fragging. This is the recipe that G2 need. This is the recipe they've been going for the entire time. That win against FaZe, again, I did say it's lowest. It's not the highest stakes in double limbs, and this wasn't technically the end of the road, but this is a huge game for most of these teams. This guarantees you playoffs, so you need to go and win it. And G2 just dominated FaZe. Sure, yeah, we all question maybe they're approaching the end of their road as FaZe. Like, they're not looking as sharp as the individuals. Maybe they need to change things up. They're still a solid Counter-Strike team, and the fact that G2 were just able to blow them out of the water, that really filled me with confidence. So I think G2, they were my favourite, number one out of this entire field to go and win the event. And yeah, I'm really glad they picked them up as a semi-finalist. They are going to, in my opinion, trounce Heroic. Big moment. No one steps up bigger than Nico, especially not since joining G2. He's been incredible on stages, and it's just been his teams letting him down. So I don't see them losing that game. And the grand final, maybe we'll get some tough one. Maybe my pick of Vitality go through. That'll be a coin flip. But it's a win for me either way. So that's kind of my view on this one. I'm feeling pretty confident about them making this final.
Yeah, no, I see the positives definitely, and going into the Blast groups, I think I might have even picked G2 going into that, and that's where I actually failed because they didn't actually make it out of the groups.
Yeah,
They ended
that's
up in the showdown, which is something that they're not unaccustomed to doing, funnily enough. So
yeah.
I,
Coming out
I
of holidays, especially, they seem to be always a bit lax starting up, and I did bring that up on
yeah,
the show. They
I
do
know,
like to take
I
their
know.
holidays off.
They do take their holidays and they do usually bottle it at the groups. So I'll take that one on the chin. I should have just thought about the context of it all as well. But yeah, G2 look fired up, and for the positives I was saying on the groups episode that we did, definitely still holds true now. Nico, m0NESY, Hunter are just such a strong core, especially because I feel like Hunter gets kind of a bad rap from people online. He thinks some people do think that he's kind of roster riding with the fact that Nico is his cousin and they're never going to get rid of him. And as much as that, I don't know if there is that kind of internal chain tying him into this roster still. He is just one of the I mean, he's one of the best riflers in the world, like alongside Nico, and he can and has often shown up in games where sometimes Nico will sometimes go missing. So to
Mhm.
have that sort of duality between this squad and for them to have been, like you said, sort of put in these positions where they're against tougher opponents but still look really really solid. I mean, yeah, they're kind of they're a very strong pick. This was you say your first pick. You actually did first pick order. You picked G2
No,
first, and
yeah.
then you picked Vitality, and that just made a whole lot of sense. So if I could have picked them, I probably would as well, because they are a strong contender for the finals.
What's amusing about people online talking about Hunter is, have they already forgotten the G2 roster where Hunter was the best player? That roster that was so irrelevantly full of terrible French players, and then Hunter and Nexa, and he was he was amazing. And sure, Nico comes in, Nico becomes top dog, but he's never been a terrible player. He's had off events, he's had weaker periods, but he's never been bad. So I don't think anyone could ever really accuse him realistically of just hogging a spot.
This is where the internet sometimes is just a little bit silly, because I'm pretty sure it was around the period where JKS came into the team and there was so much talk about, oh, he's such a good, fifth man to come into a roster, and everyone was really high on JKS. And they were thinking, oh, but what's the next improvement they could make? And it's like, oh, well, it has to be Hunter, because Modesty and Nico are both sick. But I just don't even think that there is a feasible upgrade to him as a rifler, unless you're, I don't even know who you pick up genuinely. So unless you're pulling in Rops, maybe, but.
Yeah, I mean, there's some absurd ideas always floated out there, but no, for me, he's as good as you're going to get, especially considering the natural chemistry with him and Nico. Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Keep him in.
Anything you get is a side grade if you're even going to try and go for that. So, yeah, ridiculous idea.
Absurd, yeah. So, well, I think that covers the G2 pick. There's not much more to say on it. But you made an interesting pick of yours. You went with the ENCE straight out the gate. I love them. I want to hear your reasoning for being so confident in them, because I just love hearing people talk good about ENCE. So,
well, first off, let me contextualize this. I have been down on ENCE for a long time, mainly because of all the roster moves they did towards the end of 2022. But when they rectified that, they brought in Nertz at the start of this year. I thought they looked great. I love what Nertz does for this team in terms of being able to not only this guy hunts for entry kills, but then also can sometimes close rounds and clutches as well. Like, he's a very well thought out player, especially when you look at some of his mid round decision making. But then it's a weird thing, because they won IEM Dallas. Then they went to the ESL Challenger Katowice and they lost to Virtus Pro in the finals of that, which is, those events were quite close together. They didn't play the best brand of Counter-Strike, but they're also having to battle with jet lag, which is not an excuse I gave them for the event at the time, but it is an excuse I will give them, because I understand that is quite a hard transition, and one that they're not actually used to making, and nobody really is anymore, because going from North America back to Europe is something that only North American teams have had to really deal with, and they combat that themselves by having boot camps well ahead of time now, instead of sort of traveling just for that event. So it's a weird spot, but I think this team just gels really well together. And I've honestly, in the past 4 or 5 months, I've really admired the way that Snappy calls rounds, because this guy sometimes would just go from on spawn calling, but does seem to have added a lot more sort of mid-game elements to the system that ENCE have. And I actually think I have more faith in his pieces to be able to pull things together in the mid round, not only because of individual capabilities, but because I think Snappy's read of the situations is also much more enhanced as time has gone on. So, yeah, I like this ENCE team. I think they've always been kind of undervalued, even coming into this event for Cologne. There's a lot of stories about all the roster moves and how teams are going to work together, who's going to come out well from the break. But I feel like ENCE have come in prepared and have a focus, because they not only being able to win an event, but then immediately having a show of vulnerability. They know that they have to continue working hard to actually show that they can kind of pull it against the big dogs.
Yeah, it's a bit of a slap in the face, that challenger loss. And yeah, sure, losing a close best of 3 to Jame, you kind of had to go, yeah, okay, we let him pick us apart. We were a little overreactive to this sort of stuff. He won some crazy clutches. He's Jame. He, I think, top fragged the series as well. Jame did, which is... Sometimes that does happen, but yeah, must have been a bit of a rude awakening. And in this event, it's going to be tough. I do think they're going to have to play Vitality, and I think that's going to be a big challenge. Because the one thing you cannot say about this ENCE roster is, even though every piece feels underrated, undervalued, really good for his spot and for everything else, you still have to say, but yeah, they also don't have really the superstars. It's Sampaius up against Zywoo. It's Nertz against Spinks. And whilst Nertz there's arguments that should make the Nertz maybe a smarter player than Spinks, Spinks is still a crazy fragger. And then on top of that, you don't have to deal with Flamesy and the experience and still maintained fragging of Magisk. There's so much to deal with against Vitality, and I'll be rooting for them. Even though I've picked Vitality, that's me rationalizing trying to win. I'm still an ENCE fanboy at heart in that
Mhm.
sense. I love the way Snappy calls, especially back in the day. It was always the way those explosive out of spawn calls that ENCE used to run. Oh, they were so fun to watch. It was one of the most entertaining brands of CS. Had me hooked ever since. And playing the way Nerds has been allowed to explore, and you kind of framed it very well. Like the way he's allowed to go and look for entries, but he's so smart that he still keeps himself alive and then can close around. I think that's really interesting. It's something that at times you've seen players like Nico really do super well, where they're working space at a slower, more controlled rhythm. And players that aren't destined to be superstars can never figure this out. It's really a special thing for riflers to be able to do that sort of thing. And Nerds can't do it quite consistently at the highest level. He doesn't quite have the numbers of the all-time great riflers, but he's on that trajectory. So I'm really excited to follow this ENCE side and see where they come out. Because, yeah, this Nerds guy does look like he's got that in him.
Yeah, and I just I have come to appreciate Snappy more and more. I'll concede as much. Some people might have seen me as a Snappy hater, but I was really more disappointed than hating. But been pleasantly surprised.
I've always been a big fan of that big boyish grin as well. Who could hate that man?
Yeah,
absolute legend. But I mean, that's the games as they're lined up. I mean, there's not much more to discuss about the specific matches. I'd be interested to know who's your pick so far for MVP of this event.
That one is harder for me to sort of peg down because I haven't been able to catch all of the games. And so there are certain series. I mean, the stats will certainly lean in favor of AWPers, really, but the critical games where maybe a rifler has had a solid performance, I can't make an argument against why the AWPer couldn't take it over them. So it's I don't know. I can't. I actually don't have any input.
Okay, no, it's always interested to know. I mean, I've been watching the games. Of the players that you see in the top sort of 10 in terms of rating, I just pulled them up. I think Munacy's had some really bad maps where he's had to be dragged over the line. Nico's got Hunter like next to him. So I can't say like, oh, he's the best rifler at the event. Like, no, he's also had the second best rifler at the event next to him, helping him along. But I do think it's either, for me, it's been Shiro and Device. I think those two have really had crazy games. And Zoe's up there with them. It's hard to discount him. He's rarely bad. But for me, the most impactful series I felt like I was watching, I really saw Device take over some maps. So I think I'd edge it towards him right now. But I doubt he's going to go deep. So we'll see what happens in the playoffs. But that's for the group stage. I think those are the players who really stood out to me, were Shiro and Device. They've been absolutely sensational.
Yeah, and I think what was one interesting sort of stat or something that someone pulled up is that in terms of the amount of games that they've had to play, and I think this was earlier in the tournament, but Device actually seemed to be kind of trending upward, coming into this event from some of the previous events that they've played this year. So that's always a nice positive, if this guy is able to, because I remember at Dallas, everyone's like, how is Device getting like 30 plus kills a game on this team on LAN with new pieces, all the discussion around this squad. Yeah, it's great to see Device back in the server. It always was going to be that case, but it's even stranger that he still added like an extra element to his game because he's been like way more aggressive than he ever was on previous iterations of Astralis.
Yeah, because the numbers may lie. Some people, when you say aggressive, go back and they'll whip out the opening kill stats and be like, haha, Device always attempted 20+% opening frags.
It's more aggressive his decision after the first kill.
Yeah, the re-peaking, it's like we haven't seen a confident, powered up Device, firstly, in years, but also we've never seen that combined with not having the greatest team of all time with him. Like, he's playing with 3 kids, basically. So he's having to do so much, and he seems to just be willing to do it. So that's been absolutely fantastic to see. Like, Device coming back and just going, you know what, simple numbers, Zywoo numbers, I can do that too. What are you guys talking about?
Yeah. He wants to be in the conversation for top 3 in the world, maybe even top 1. So,
I mean, can you imagine how annoying the GOAT debate becomes if Device ends this year as the number 1 player?
I mean, it won't happen. It actually won't, because I think Zywoo has probably won that conversation by a mile.
Zywoo's probably already won it. I mean, someone whipped out the numbers. The next closest rating player to Zywoo is like 0-9 away, which is so far. And that was, I think, Shiro. But also then, yeah, Zo's got the MVP of the major. He's got probably more MVPs coming down the line. I've forgotten if he's actually got any more, off the top of my head. But yeah, it's going to be tough for him to catch, though. But if, Sparkly Dreams if he somehow gets number one, holy crap, that's going to be a debate. That's going to be a real debate.
Just for the narrative, it should happen.
Oh, I'd love it. I'd absolutely love it. But all right, I'm going to put up a poll asking, the viewers their takes. I think the polls on YouTube are normally limited to 5 picks. So I'm sorry. It's either Astralis or Cloud9 have to leave off the poll as who they pick to win the event. They're going to pick one of Vitality, G2, or Heroic, is my guess. So I'm not too bothered about the 6th best team not being on there. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. Hopefully we can start catching up. Well, no, not you. Hopefully I can start catching up to the viewers. The viewers can start getting stuff wrong. So I'd like to avoid the double damage forfeit that there is this year. Yeah.
I just want to beat you, so I don't really care. I don't even care about catching the viewers.
You're happy with second? Is that
I just want to beat you. That's the core objective here.
Well, we'll see how it goes. So far, it's neck and neck. So the race for me and you is exactly neck and neck. So we'll see how it goes after this event. I'm feeling really confident about my picks, though. So we'll see come Sunday who's looking pretty. But yeah, thanks for joining me, and thanks everyone for watching. There'll be another one. Hopefully, the next event starts at a reasonable time of the week with, enough of a heads up for me to realize it's going to start. And we'll try and get another preview done. But yeah, see you in the next one. Goodbye.